how are we really measuring belonging and inclusion? And that's when I realised that actually we measure the what. We measure who has turned up, past tense. We measure what grades they have got, past tense. And so what I wanted to do was look at actually how do we surface up these hidden voices? And that's where I started to really dive into the data we do in schools.
Hello and welcome to In This Together, the podcast where we talk to brilliant minds from across education and beyond to explore the importance of well-being in education. My name is Becky Dawson and we are so grateful for you joining us for this episode. Our hope is that you will take something away from every episode that influences how you work with and support young people and how you look after yourself and your colleagues. Today's guest is Dr. Nicole Ponsford. I have to emphasise the doctor there because I'm so proud of her. The founding CEO of the Global Equality Collective, or GEC, an award-winning researcher, author and educator. She's also the co-head of education at Microlink, where she focuses on assistive technologies and inclusive innovation. Nick's work centres on inclusion, well-being and how schools can use data and technology to make education fairer and more supportive for everyone. Dr. Nick, it's lovely to have you here.
Absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for wanted to spend some time with me.
No, absolutely. We've been looking forward to this episode. We are so thrilled that you're going to spend some time with us today and share some of the brilliant work you're doing. So let's start from the beginning. What was the core inspiration that really sparked your passion for inclusion and well-being in education? Where did it all start?
I think it came from me being a student, to be honest with you. So for me, school was my safe place. So those of you listening will probably know what that means. And my rock stars were Nana Cherry and Salt and Pepper, and my teachers the teacher who would keep me in at a break time to have a little chat to see how I was, or give me a quiet corner so I could do some drawing, which I was passionate about. And so that, I think, ignited a feeling that school was home for me. And although I felt that grown-ups and old people were teachers, when I I ended up, I got to university, I had to pay to, do that. I had to work 5 nights a week to get through university and all that thing. I self-funded traveling around the world, and then I wanted to work in advertising and marketing and things. And actually, I ended up having a really big car crash, spun a car Fast and Furious style. And when I was recovering, I was like, do you know what? I'm going to be a teacher. And then when I got into teaching, it was, again, like a home. I loved it. I can't whistle. I can't snowboard very well, it turns out. But teaching was something I could do, and I loved it. But I realised really quickly that actually it's not a safe place for all students. I heard how other colleagues talked about the kid I would have been. It's not a safe space for staff. And I found that as I went to different schools along the way. And then also now as a parent to send kids, I had that experience as well of not being a safe space. And so I think that's really been my mission for the last 25 years, of trying to help to make schools that safe place where I felt that I belonged in the first place. And so that's it. That's been the whole reason for doing it, of, I suppose, like the child that I was, and trying to help the children going forwards, which sounds very worthy, but, that's kind of where it's all come from.
Powerful stuff, creating the system you felt you needed, which is, an incredibly powerful motivator in the work that you're doing. You talk about safety and belonging, and I think belonging is a real buzzword at the moment in education, isn't it? What have you learned about belonging from listening to, you've got 26,000 and more, I know, in your data and your reports. What have you learned from those student and staff voices about belonging?
Well, there's a whole wealth, isn't there? I was a teacher, and then I've come out of it to be a doctoral researcher, and now I'm an EdTech founder. And it's an interesting word, belonging, isn't it? It's an idea that's kind of changed when I started to create the GEC, and we started with a grassroots community of experts, and that's when inclusion, I think, and belonging, those words have changed. I mean, when I was teaching, inclusion really meant disability and at local authority level. And then inclusion has kind of changed in the last 5 years or so to be part of EDI, and that can be quite politically polarizing. And so people have kind of sometimes step back from that. Belonging then becomes quite a safe word. It doesn't necessarily always cover everything of the Equality Act, for example, around LGBT plus, where there could be real conflict, fear, and a lack of understanding, and a hatred sometimes in it. So belonging sort of has become a bit of a safer word, I think. And you can see that, I think, most recently with Ofsted using words belong. We get flourishing, don't we? We get thriving. We get all these kinds of words around it. And so for me, I see belonging is a place of safety, and that belonging really links to Maslow's hierarchy of needs in the first place. And so when I was thinking about that and creating a framework that we could work with school leaders and work with schools, which is where all our research comes out of, it's all the schools that have used our platform, so all the staff and all the students. We've just hit 20,000 students that we've surveyed on this, which is phenomenal. We have basically used what the foundation of belonging or intentional inclusion is, which is around Maslow, to work out how they feel. So it can be the areas of school that they feel more safe in. It can be where they feel safe in the curriculum, for example. It can be if they've got a trusted adult in school. And so what we're doing around that, around this data, which we call kaleidoscopic data, which I can talk about a bit more later, what we've been able to do is now share that, because I kind of feel that national headlines don't really tell us the context of our own school, our own people. And that's what, as teachers, that's what we're interested in, the people around us. What I've been able to do is firstly create a review of our trends, which we put out in the summer, which we call 26,000 Voices. And so that reports out on our website. And then what I wanted to do was make this information, this data for inclusion, open to everyone. So we've released our inclusion index, and we've just released our second inclusion index this term. And next term, we'll release the next one, and so on and so on. As part of that, we do look at things like belonging. And actually, in the second inclusion index, belonging was the third behaviour area in terms of our kind of top 10 barriers. And in this, we found that just 18% of students feel that they belong at school. 18% of our students strongly feel that they belong at school, which I think is really powerful when you think we've got a backdrop of 140,000 students not in school. We've just had the curriculum review and the response by the DfE saying how that they're going to support that. And so, I've got lots of data I can give you around different things: inclusion, attendance, safety, culture, all those kinds of things for staff and students. But I suppose, coming back to what you've asked, it all hangs on all the different ways we can belong in a school. And that's what I've been, sort of obsessed with, this kind of like Kaplunk model of marbles and straws and how that all interconnects to make up that experience for our staff and students.
And I think that's, what's really important is that different people will have a sense of belonging built in different ways. And that's why it's tough. This work is hard, isn't it? It's not easy. It's not a set of values that you kind of just print off and that's it, job done. It's ongoing conversations. I think that's what I love about the work you're doing, is that, you're giving us these headlines, which is great, but each school is getting a really clear picture of that sense for them, because each school will need to do things differently dependent on their context and their cohort, with some of the fundamentals in place.
That's it. And there's no single data set that can kind of define a school. So, I think as we're starting to really understand the power of data in particular, we're starting to see that actually we need something that's not static like we've had in the past. And what's been kind of weird is, as I've gone along this, my idea was, we're not really getting inclusion right. So what have we done? And that's the doctoral research. It's called Map in the Field. So you go and read all the academic literature on what happens around inclusion, belonging, diversity. You look at national policies, you look at international policy. So you really go down the rabbit hole. What I found, and why my work was slightly different, was that I knew when it came to inclusion, actually that's not what schools do. Schools don't go to the academic research. They go to the people with the lived experience. And if you've got that on your staff team, great. That's a really good starting point. And you're very unlikely to get all the different equality at demographics in your leadership team. We know this, like 0.1% of black head teachers are black, for example. We know the issues we've got around global majority and leadership. We've got issues around disability, neurodivergent leaders and teachers and recruitment, etc. So we know that we don't have these living, breathing, multidimensional, cross-demographic, intersectional leadership team. So when that doesn't happen, the model has been bring a consultant in, essentially. And that kind of commercial model, when you look then back at the data, it's not really changing a dial. We know we've had great grassroots community groups around, for example, women in education, but actually still women aged 30 to 39 are the biggest demographic leaving our schools. So what I wanted to do when I was looking at the field, I looked at the academic style, but I also looked at our consultancy models, our coaching models, and the ways that we actually tried to get inclusion right. And as I was doing this, I started to see some of the issues we've got where, there's geographical restrictions when you've got one person trying to do it. There's a lack of consistency. So it depends on the person you've got in front of you and your school. If you're a leader, like I was looking for solutions, sometimes that model can actually do more hindrance than help a school. And we see that where schools then suffer or trust suffer, where there might be conflict in the community. And so I started to look at how do we do this and how do we measure it, more importantly. And that was really interesting. And that came me to this idea of, how are we really measuring belonging and inclusion? And that's when I realised that actually we measure the what. We measure who has turned up, past tense. We measure what grades they have got, past tense. And that's very static, very fixed data. And for me, as I'll quite openly say, I should have been a free school meal child. And I think my gravelly voice after being at the Schools and Academy show this week kind of illustrate that. My counsellor say accent comes out a bit more, but it was too shameful for my parents to put me in that. So I wasn't in that data bucket. And what that then means was I then wasn't maybe given those funding opportunities. I wasn't given that kind of, awareness. I was kind of invisible apart from a couple of, conversations with the teachers that I mentioned. And I realised that actually, if I was invisible with the data, lots of others are, and we know they are. And for example, looking at our inclusion index, just our recent one from this term, 33% of our students surveyed feel invisible in our curriculums. So it's not just me, And so what I wanted to do was look at actually how do we surface up these hidden voices? And that's where I started to really dive into the data we do in schools. And, I also realised one of the reasons I used to switch off when any assistant head turned up with an Excel spreadsheet is that I've got dyscalculia. So, those little numbers in boxes never really meant a lot to me. I found it quite boring, to be honest with you. Which is funny now that I've now designed a new data set and I'm called a data scientist and I hate Excel.
And also the fact that you are so excited about data as well. It's been, those of us that know you will know that data really floats your boat. So it's interesting to know that.
Yeah. So it's weird. So on one bit I can't stand it and I switch off. And then the other side I get super excited. So, the visualization of data became really important. I kind of got obsessed with, what do dashboards look like? How can we ask staff questions that we weren't asked before? And I think part of it was because, when I started teaching in 2000, that's when the Google browser came in. And we know that people started to ask Google questions, and they still do, that they wouldn't ask their friends and family. I was like, well, how can Google have this psychologically safe space and yet our classrooms don't? And so putting those two bits together and thinking how technology can create a safe space, which we know happens with online communities for our neurodivergent friends. And, I wanted to look at how we could do that. And that's where looking at data in a new way and combining that with the Equality Act, combining that with anonymous spaces, combining that with self-identified demographics, which we don't normally get in schools. And there's also things about power and agency and data as well when you go into the academic side, which I'll skim over. And so that's what I wanted to do. And I also wanted to look at the multi-dimensional way that I would be seen. So I get pulled into a lot of women in data or women in tech things. But actually, if I was going to self-identify, my gender is probably third down the list of how I would describe myself. And so I've always been intersectional. There's been lots of different demographics that come along, and and it changed. I've had kids, I've had to go through early menopause, it's always changing, isn't it? Actually, our data doesn't reflect that in schools. It's not fluid. It doesn't illustrate the lived experience of our kids where there might be a death in the family or, they get cancer, or we don't have data that helps us with that fluidity. And so that's what I wanted to look at. And so, going beyond what we would normally have. That's kind of in that nuance, which we don't have, is where I really like to sit.
And that's your kaleidoscopic data?
Yes. And
so tell us more about how that works and how it supports schools to be less tick box and actually make meaningful changes. Because quite often I've seen it in schools, you'll do a survey or do a focus group and you'll get some feedback and you'll change one thing and you haven't asked the right people, or you've asked the same young people you always ask because they're the first ones to volunteer, or you haven't kind of delved into it. You've done none of that into kind of secting understanding of it. Tell us how kaleidoscopic data is different.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, it kind of is an extension of what I've said. So where I started to look at how we measure and we value what we measure in school, I wanted to flip it and measure, do it in the kind of other way. And I started to look at how we create data. So the first thing I did was I created what we call the GEC circle. So that's my grassroots inclusion belonging group of experts, and we're over 400 strong. So I didn't just want to ask one person around neurodiversity or misogyny or anti-racism. I wanted to speak to everyone. And those people who know me, I love talking and I love connecting and meeting people. So that's been great. So that's what I did to map out the field of what we're already doing inclusion. And I realised then that actually there's a lot of people working in isolation. It's a tough space to work in inclusion and well-being. And actually, I thought rather than having sharp elbows, let's, work together, let's be a collective. So that's where the Global Equality Collective came from. So that was the first instance. So I went to find what was the experience, what people were talking about, and how could we connect. So the next stage one was to build a platform. And I wanted a platform to be a report and support model. So the report bit is basically different versions of surveys, which I'll talk through in a sec. But it was done in a way that it would give a school leader everything they needed really quickly, that they could do better than they had been doing before. And so when I left teach, I did 10 years of teaching in the classroom. I had my oldest who had needs, and I was told, you can't be a senior leader if you can't be on site 5 days a week. But I wasn't ready to be kicked out of education yet. So I hung on. I did some freelance work for a bit. And then I joined an organisation called Achievement for All, which was set up by Professor Sonia Blanford, one of the first professors of social mobility. And social mobility that doesn't end with university, by the way. So I worked with them for 9 years. And for the first 5 years, I was an achievement coach, and I would go into schools and the leaderships would do a survey, an audit, and they would say how the school was doing from their point of view. And then I would go and I would do focus groups and interviews with the staff. And what would happen would be I would come out, and then someone would always come up to me and they would say, I couldn't say that because my line manager was in the room. Or they would say, if I was with the students would say, I'm not saying that because I hate that teacher that was with you. Or if I spoke to the parents and carers, they'd say, I don't want to say that in front of people at school because it might jeopardise their chances for my child. So it got me thinking, actually, when we do ask questions, when we do bring people in, actually, people still lie. That data is not reliable. So what I wanted to do, using technology, was create a safe space that people could have that voice. And so the kaleidoscopic data does a couple of things. We have our inclusion audit for school leaders, which can be Senkos, head teachers, even have HR doing it. So they do an inclusion audit of a 360 of what's going on with all the elements around provisions, curriculum, families, students, leadership, strategies, everything, the whole 360. Then we have our staff survey. And again, that asks all staff. So that's site teams, lunchtime supervisors, curriculum staff, governors, that asks everyone. So you've got your whole ecosystem there. Because again, as a school leader, I could work for months with a kid who didn't want to be in school. I'd get them in, and then one comment from someone on the site team, or one comment when they went for lunch. And that'll be it. And there'll be a brick through a window and I'll be back to square one helping them. So I knew all staff had to have the same language, the same awareness of these things. And also we had to kind of test biases. We had to test, if people were being racist and sexist and making those decisions. And as a school leader, I wanted that environment, that culture, that climate, whatever you want to call it, I wanted that to be positive and we were all there together. At that point, the platform then releases the student surveys. Because you can only really ask the students how they're feeling with the knowledge that you're going to get some uncomfortable things back, and you're going to get kids actually wanting to talk about what's going on. So you want your staff to be ready. So that's what we do. So then the student surveys are launched. what happens in terms of the platform, then that releases then our intersectional data. So you can look at the voice of your students. For example, I've missed time here because I'm me. And then you can look at that data to see if it's your neurodivergent kids, if it's the kids around race, religion, key stages. So you can really target in ways. And what we have found going through the data as well, that for the staff and students, it's those from single parent families that have the least sense of belonging in school. Now, if you're a school leader and you know that, you can do something quickly and target your interventions, your funding, your time to do something really positive to help those people have a better sense of belonging in your school. What our data also does, it then releases coaching recommendations based on gaps written with the GEC circle. So you've got that expertise in-house, and then we've got our champion hub. Now, the extra reason that this is slightly different was I didn't just want to bung some questions in, and there's a lot of organisations that do that. But for me, it was about designing it with the participants. So, for example, with the student surveys, we worked for a year with 50 student councils who helped us design the surveys. We worked with Goldsmiths University, and we worked with Goldsmiths University's Teacher Centre, and then we worked with their nursery hub as well. So we really took it to, the degree that we could. I was told, don't look at demographics in kids and don't do early years. So obviously I ignored that advice. And so our surveys go from the age of 3 to post 16. And yes, the same questions. That was 6 months of looking at the questions. And so likewise with our staff, we didn't just work with teachers in schools and, trust leaders. We also worked with the Institute of School Business Leaders. I spent a year on their regional circuit, speaking to school business leaders around this. And they helped. What the platform is also, as well as being designed with the schools, it's also got the lens of academia, and it's called a Participatory Action Research Project. So what that means is everything we've designed has been designed with the participants first. So what our schools get that are different, they get not only that experience of knowing people with lived experience have helped build it, the GC Circle, not only have schools, from the students through to the staff body have helped do it. Not only that, we've also got the academic side. So Bournemouth University, where I did my research, universities of Surrey, Kent and UCL worked on the staff one, Goldsmiths on the student one, like I said. So there's a whole methodology, which is what I'm trying to say, around it. So if you just put a survey out to your kids and you are not thinking about them at the centre, which is what we do, you will not firstly get reliable data. You will secondly not give them that experience. And what we also do is we've designed a whole teacher toolkit about student surveys, like making sure every kid not only could point to your DSL, but they've had a conversation with them. So when they are then doing the surveys and there's an issue, not only are the DSLs know they need to be around the rooms when they're doing the surveys, the kids have got that point of contact with them. There's social capital that's been built with them. We've got links to mental health organisations in the GEC. We advise that, where it's done. But also with the surveys, we've got a consent button, because we found that a lot of kids just do a survey now in tutor time. They don't get asked to do it. There's no consent. And when you look at the digital rights of a child, the ICO, digital rights of a child should consent to do these things. So all that hard work and thinking has all been designed into it. And that's why it's called Kaleidoscopic Data. And I only named that like at the end of submitting my thesis. It took me 6 years to come up with that. And the kaleidoscope is obviously, you're not looking at things through a single lens. And also, I think what's most important, we want the square pegs to fit. So every shape fits in a kaleidoscope, which shows you obviously the true colours, which is that kind of element as well. So it's multidimensional, it changes, and it's a new set of data. It's called a third data set that we've not had, because the other two are your mapping, which is like your national attendance data. Your satellite data is your English in my school results. And then the third set is what I've designed, which is kaleidoscopic data. Sorry, that's a very long response to that question.
I mean, I think everyone listening will appreciate the time and effort that has gone into developing such an incredible approach. But it's because this isn't about a one-off activity, isn't it? It's not about doing this at the beginning of the term and then moving on. This has to be a constant conversation, doesn't it? And I think you highlighted really importantly that we need to prepare schools and staff that they might not like the outcome. They might not like some of the things that they hear. And that's the hardest thing about doing, feedback. It's much easier just to get on and do your work without finding out whether people are appreciating it. And it's about the impact rather than the intention. I don't think any schools go about their daily business with the intention of making children not feel like they belong or making young people feel isolated. But sometimes that is the impact, regardless of whether they know it at all. And it sounds like you're building in the support to ensure that those conversations are held safely, that people can do something about it without feeling threatened, and that they can actually make that difference.
Yeah, because otherwise it all gets kind of siloed, doesn't it? And I know there's a lot of like well-being surveys out there, but the schools and trusts come to us and say, it kind of told us what we thought, what next? And it's that what next that I think when you've got a teacher mindset, it's always about the what next. What do I do? You're solution focused. And I still now, when I go out, I'm always the one physically moving the chairs about. And when it came to this, I was like, why are we all sort of okay with what's going on? Why haven't we got under the hub of this? And I think part of it, it is quite scary saying to kids, what don't you like about it here? Have you got someone you can talk to? Maybe we should have more conversations about why we're doing Of Mice and Men now. And, those kinds of conversations, which are tricky. And we kind of think,
spectacles.
My son's doing it at the moment, actually. And, and I taught that 25 years ago. Like, it's crazy, really. But I kind of think, like, we've seen a lot in education in the last 5 years. We've got through COVID. We're seeing the ramifications of social media and digitalization. And we now know that, AI or patterns created in a computer are here. And actually that social capital, that relationships, connections, that humanity is really important in schools. It's about having connections with the kids. And if they like the teacher, they'll do a subject they don't really like. They will come into school to see that person. And particularly if, like me, school is a safe place. And so we want that. We all get into teaching and we all work with schools because we want to do it for the kids. But what we've lacked in the past is a real thorough understanding of what the school experience is like for the kids, particularly when we know we can do better. So those ethical leaders who are looking at things like sustainability in their school, they're really focused on the members of staff that they don't want to quietly quit or exit early. And the ones that are really looking at how they can help support their communities, how they can support their kids that they know that they need to do more for, the kids that are coming, with a migration status, or the kids that are waiting for CAMS or waiting for, neurodiversity diagnosis. Those leaders are the ones that are already being brave and bold, who are saying, do you know what, I think we need to do something a bit different here. I'm not quite satisfied with where we're at. And I think that's what's been just fantastic for me, that this was meant to just be a research project. And now we've turned into a live delivery, like accidentally become successful. So we've got, we've got our report's 26,000 voices, but we're actually about 32,000 voices we've surveyed. We've got hundreds of schools coming to us. We're now across 30 countries. Like, it's gone great bonkers, but it shows that there are schools and trusts out there that are saying, do you know what, Nick, I support what you're doing, but actually that would be really super helpful here, because I'd rather know what I don't know. And that's a big feedback. Yeah, I want to know what I don't know so I can really do something about it. And if you do look at the evidence, school improvements takes 2 to 3 years. This isn't something you get ready, you have an hour assembly on and it's all done. This is something that is a school improvement and action research program. And thankfully, a lot of leaders know that will work in their schools, and they're brave enough to say, I need a little bit of help with this, which I think's really encouraging for the system. I think I'm seeing some of the bravest leaders who don't want to turn their back on this in these uncomfortable conversations. They're quite happy to get a bit sticky in the middle of it and learn with the kids, and maybe give a little bit of their power and privilege over to those that haven't had it in their schools before, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, and I'm always a bit suspicious of any leaders that think they've sorted it. They've sorted well-being, or they've got belonging sorted. And any leaders that tell you, yeah, we're getting everything right, I'm not sure you're looking under all of the rocks.
Well, you're not. But you can get a survey where you will say to the kids, are you all happy here? And all the kids know that every keystroke they put in is identified, and they will go, yep, I'm happy. And then they'll miss school, or they won't be listening, even though a teacher's reading out a book, they'll be the ones who are like, I'm not going to tell anyone, I can't really see the screen, or I don't really have anyone to talk to, or, I'm not really going to pick those subjects when I go up the school. Those are the kids. And so you can do lovely wellbeing surveys or inclusion surveys or EDI surveys but it's knowing you're creating a really safe space, that your methodology is correct. And actually at the heart of it, you are trying to help surface up those hidden voices. And when you do, we see it, we see year on year. We've got one trust we work with, and not only are they've really taken ownership of it. So they've done brilliant pieces around misogyny, around colorism, around things like that, particularly, when we've had the massive issues around the flags, after this summer, there were riots after the summer before. Who knows what's going to be coming up with the political situation we've got in this country, where it's so polarised. We've got 16-year-olds who are going to be voting. They've got no idea who Keir Starmer is, because all they see is Nigel Farage and they think he speaks for them. We've got issues coming ahead around. We are going to have to get kind of uncomfortable with it. So one of our schools that have been managing all of those things, not only have they, they feel that they've got those open conversations in schools, they're now oversubscribed because words got round how safe the kids feel through the parents and carers, and obviously they're doing great with Ofsted because Ofsted are seeing this. So there's a kind of, if there's not the ethical case, there's a kind of business case that this works. So it's worth getting a little bit uncomfortable, because actually it maximises all of the things that you want for a thriving school.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've touched on this to some degree. So let's see if we can take it any further. But obviously school leadership is crucial in this. And, if we're going to really, we're talking about a culture here. We're not just talking about kind of nice to have, or the kind of the surface level. We need to see sustainable culture of belonging and inclusion. And, like you said, Ofsted are looking for that as well as it being the morally right thing to do. As an ex-school leader and someone doing this work, if someone's listening to this podcast and they're wanting to start this journey, what's your advice? Where do you start? It can feel overwhelming, I think. And I think, what would you suggest to leaders in that position? What would the starting point be?
Obviously, the starting point is come to me, but I'm here to help.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah, that's the first bit. But what I would say is, when you said it started with leaders, that's really true. And so the kaleidoscopic data is one bit from my research. The other bit is social capital. So it might be worthwhile talking to that for a moment. So social capital, we've all heard of cultural capital and Bourdieu. That's something that we kind of got. For me, I feel that's still slightly problematic from a privilege point of view. When we think having high cultural capital, it's sort of encompassed in that, high arts, and, so I think that's still problematic. But what people don't know, and what we haven't really had in education before, is something called social capital. So social capital is the way that by being alongside someone else and through having a relationship or having a connection, our worth socially improves. So we kind of bank that. So you can see that when, for example, when you look at maybe MPs, for example, of those that have been to private school, and how their social connections have helped them with a lot of things, including cultural capital as well, but that has helped them get ahead. So this is about how having those connections, and that works in schools. It's how we can kind of having our networks, our communications, help us build within society. So financially or relationship-wide, et cetera, et cetera. So social capital is created out of three things. So the first way we can build social capital is with people that are similar to ourselves. So you can think of this from a staff point of view. You can even see it when you go in the staff room next, you'll see it. So the people who are like one homogenous group, everyone's kind of the same. They either are all above the waterline of visibility, kind of look the same, or they've got the same sort of shared interests. And you can also see it at lunch with the kids when they sit in their groups as well. So that's called bonding social capital. The next way you get social capital is with building. So that's when you work across groups. So where you've got the kid, I was a bit of a social butterfly. I was kind of mates with all the different groups, that was me. And actually those people that work in the school, identify that there are different groups and understand we can all kind of get ahead if we kind of work together. That's where you build that. So you do see sometimes in schools where they might have an LGBT plus group, or they might have a for staff or students, or they might have a neurodiversity group. You can see that kind of works. The problem with it can kind of stop there. And it also creates the kind of the other side of things, the flip of it. So in that first group where everyone kind of feels the same, it can also create groupthink. We can see with real extreme political groups, for example. Or we can see where we've had the issues around misogyny with young men and Andrew Tate. When we have like these separate like EDI groups in school, they're kind of okay, but if you don't have all your groups represented, that also is a bit of why is there a group for them and not for us? What really helps with social capital is the third bit, which is the leadership angle. It's called linking social capital. And this is where you've got a leader that has a strategic overview of that social capital and helps give power and resources to everyone. And that's what we've also built our work at the GEC about, because actually when a school has tiny little groups that kind of are working parties, actually it doesn't help belonging across the board. What helps is when a leader says, do you know what? We're going to be really intentional about inclusion, and we're going to do it in the way that basically I've designed, which is we're going to ask everyone how they feel. We're going to listen to what they say, and then we're going to put actions based on what they say. So that's your action research framework, isn't it? Plan, do, assess, review. So that's the kind of way that learning can really come from leadership and that leadership drive. And I think with my conversations that I've had with Ofsted, and if we think about the inclusion criteria, you can see at the top of that, leaders need to be able to talk to inclusion and well-being as part of it. This isn't something where you just, you ask your frightened Senko to come in and they've got to come up with all the answers. They will have the answers, but actually you on the trust leadership team, you should know this. And not only should you know it, you should be able to evidence this. And that data for inclusion, qualitative and quantitative data, is the first time schools have been asked for this. And I'm delighted, not only because obviously I've worked out a way to do it and I can help schools to do it right, but actually that's what we should be doing. We shouldn't just be going, we've just done this quick survey.
Hasn't it for too long.
Yeah. And that's where the storytelling, the qualitative data makes a real impact, I think. But it only works when leadership really take over with it as well. So leaders are crucial to social capital, I would say.
That's really, really interesting, and perhaps not where people would have expected the conversation to go, which is why I love this podcast. And I think that's something that anyone listening can, make steps towards understanding more, engaging more with. And like you say, if things are going to change in a school, these are the ones that have to start it. I mean, you obviously have to have the community on side with you. You have to do it with people rather than to them. But that social capital is a fascinating kind of exploration of schools are fascinating places. If you think back to how they work and how they interweave and different people's experiences, it's just, the fact that some people will have had an amazing experience of school and loved it for so many different intersecting reasons, and others will have found it like traumatic. And, young people I've worked with who haven't been in school for 3 years, just the thought of going in makes them feel physically sick. And there are so many different aspects of it. But that social capital, it all comes down to connection in the end, doesn't it? It all comes down to those connected relationships and understandings, and that's what really makes a difference.
It's always fascinated me, this idea that around a certain time in the morning a school fills, and when you're out by the gate, hundreds and thousands of kids like coming in. We're all in these buildings, like little marbles, aren't we? Like in pinball, everyone's like around each other, and then everyone goes again, and then it happens again. And for being a school leader who worked in some of the most deprived areas of my regions with, I was headhunted to work in a school where Millie Dowler had been, the schoolgirl that was murdered. I was part of a Year 9 tutor team there. I've worked in schools where horrific things normally would happen at 4:00 on a Friday when the senior leaders had gone home. I knew the importance of the time you have. And sometimes, you're in school and you're waiting for something to happen, and it's like, every minute counts. And while there's decisions maybe being made in a corner, you're like, but this kid's coming back in half an hour and they're going to be in my classroom. That feeling. And so I've always, that ebb and flow of those connections and how people see it differently, and the biases, obviously we kind of know about, but actually being able to have a lens to understand that is really cool and really powerful. And when I look at the data, I do go for all the qualitative data. I've seen all the stories of staff and students in our schools. I can see how they feel. And as well as the ones which aren't working, I see where it is. I see where the teachers have been given flexible working or been given support for mental health or asked for workplace adjustments, and they love it. I've seen the bits where the kids have found a teacher they can finally talk to, or an adult who's not a teacher, imagine that they can talk to, or, they've said that some adjustments have been made or assistive technology has been brought in that can really support them as well. So we see the good of where schools are doing a great job, and school leaders are normally, fall off their chair because they think it's all going to be bad. And actually they hear so much good because of the good work they're already doing. So I just want to also make that really clear as well.
Well, I think that's a really important point as well. We can get too far down that conversation of all the things schools are doing that aren't working, but actually there's some amazing practice out there. There's some, brilliant practitioners. And I do feel that most teachers, educators, school staff are there because they want to be there, because they care, they want the best for their children, young people. They're just working in a difficult system, obviously, and sometimes, and the data and the work that you're doing helps them to see how that system is impacting on the young people that they're working with. We're coming on to my final question now, and I just wanted to ask really what's really giving you hope for the future of the education sector? And it's kind of linked on from what you just said, but what are you seeing and what's really kind of lighting your fire in terms of what's going to happen in the next 5-10 years?
I think there's a couple of things. The first thing would be the adoption of technology for good. And I know a lot of people are talking about AI when it comes to lesson plans and things like that. But I think my side work that I do for microlink education and seeing how tech that's already in our devices like Immersive Reader and Microsoft and Helper Bird being used with Google and Apple, and seeing that students are being able to unlock opportunities like being able to read for the first time, dictation helping, multilinguistic learners having a bit more of a voice in school, things like that. That brings me real hope that we're going to be able to create a really accessible curriculum for our young people going forwards, and more teachers and the teaching assistants that I'm talking to are seeing that that's a real tool that can support them so they can be the best facilitator and human support, and they've got great tools that the kids can use. So that's what I really like, that tech for good angle. I think that there is a growing sense that coming from the DFE, there will be steps forward on what can be achieved. I'm seeing with the schools and trusts that I'm working with and the regions and, countries, that actually schools are starting to realise that this is contextual based when it comes to inclusion and wellbeing. And actually they've got the power to do things right here, right now. We know that the curriculum changes won't be coming in for a few years. So there are things people can do to get ahead of the curve now and start to think about actually what do we want our curriculum to look like now? Where are our gaps? What can we do better? And likewise, that sense of belonging, which we talked about right at the start, which would be, people are recognising that having welcome written in 80 different languages isn't actually the thing we do to get inclusion right, that we're ready to really listen to the unheard voices. And as a result of that, I know that schools will be better and thrive more because they've shaped inclusive cultures around it. So, probably those things. And I think, I know school is a challenge. I like to think that as an opportunity. I'm quite a sunny person. And so there are great opportunities ahead. Things can only get better, as they say.
Love that, in the words of Dee. We always end the podcast with a request, and I can't remember if I've prepared you for this or not, Dr. Ponsford, so I might be putting you on the spot. We ask for a sharing is caring. We ask our guests to recommend something. So if you need a few minutes to think about it, you actually can, but it might be a book or a podcast or whatever it is. Is there something you think people out there should be delving more deeply into?
Yes, I have a gift. So on our website, we've got loads of free resources, and on that we have got free playbooks, which are like our e-learning modules that we've got in our GEC platform. We've got blogs, and we've got GEC Know-How. So GEC Know-How is the largest collection of inclusion and wellbeing resources. It was for bookshelves originally because I was an English and media teacher. We've extended it to playlists. And on that, we have got reads from early years and I was going to say adult books, but I shouldn't, through to grown-up books, as well as TV shows, films. We've also got a link to our GEC bookshop. We did have stuff on Amazon and we've moved it. And on that, Olivia in our team has created library resources, like £500, etc. So if you want a range of diverse books for either primary or secondary, we've created that all for you. We've partnered with Mary Myatt. We're supporting her. And we've also got Jamie Oliver's Dyslexia Revolution in the GEC Circle. So we've just put loads of new dyslexia-friendly books in there ahead of National Year of Reading. So GEC Know-How would probably be my gift. Go and jump in, have a look. And there's loads of books there also by our GEC Circle that you may not have discovered yet. So that would be my sharing is caring gift back to you.
I think that's sharing is caring times 100. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And Nick, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. It's just lovely that I get to share this with lots of other people. So thank you so much for your time today. It's really very much appreciated. I cannot wait to see where the GEC goes, because I know it's just going to go up and up from here. So thank you so much.
You're too kind. Thank you very much.
We would love you all listening to follow us on your podcast platform. And if you feel able to give us a rating and review, that would be wonderful. It means more people will find out about the podcast. And we think these are conversations educators need to hear. Don't forget to drop us an email if you have any thoughts, comments, questions, or want to share some brilliant work that you are doing for wellbeing in your setting. Just email teamwellbeing@twinkle.co.uk. Thank you so much and see you on the next ep.